Well, welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Charles Good. Our guest for this episode is May Busch, who is an international executive, speaker, and best-selling author. She is passionate about helping people thrive at work and reaching their full potential. Previously, May enjoyed a 24-year career in investment banking, most recently as the COO of Morgan Stanley Europe. In this episode, we're going to explore the three dimensions of ability that you need to master in order to pave the way to your desired role. We're also going to examine the career potential S curve and provide strategies for cultivating top-notch teams. I hope you enjoy. Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we engage with esteemed thought leaders and explore research-backed strategies and techniques that empower leaders at every level to achieve meaningful results that drive lasting change. Welcome to the program, May.
Thank you so much, Charles.
So I love your book, how it's designed. It's the what, where, when, and how of advancing your career so you can fulfill your potential. And it's really structured around three overarching tasks that make up the achiever path. So, May, would you go through those for our listeners?
Yes. So, number one is to develop your capabilities. And when I talk about capabilities, these are not the technical skills you need to excel at your job. Those are necessary, but they're not sufficient. And it's really about all those more qualitative skills. We'll talk about the specific areas, but really developing those capabilities that you will need. The second thing is to own your own development. So that means that nobody cares as much about your career as you do. And nobody benefits from having a great career as much as you do. So you want to understand where you are in your career achiever path. And then what do you need to do in the stage you're in order to be successful? Then the third piece of it is to be prepared for the milestones that you're going to need to hit as you go along your career path. And the thing about these milestones is they're not always well signposted. In fact, the more senior you get, the less you're told about them at all. So you've got to figure those out for yourself. And I call those career gates.
So, two big things that kind of came out to me from those three overarching tasks is one, I hear this a lot from managers that go into a leadership role in stating that now I'm being judged by a different metric. It used to be my technical skills that got me the promotion and excelling in my field. Now it's people skills. And it was kind of a bait and switch for me. I didn't realize I was being graded on a different metric than what I thought. So it's really important to have that distinction that you need to develop beyond your technical skills if you go into a leadership or a people manager role.
I totally agree with you, Charles. And I think that even if you stay as a subject matter expert, you are likely to get to a point where you are so senior that it's not just you locked in your room or in front of your computer or whatever it is, doing your thing all by yourself. You're going to be asked to mentor other people, and so there's going to be a people part for almost everyone. I'm sure there's somebody who can say, "Oh, well, wait, but there's no people part in my job and I'm pretty senior." But for I'm going to say 90 plus percent of us, there's going to be some part like that. So the bait and switch you talked about, that happens to all of us. And the key thing is to catch that inflection point. And I like to draw a graph. I love having things that are visual, and so if you can imagine a box with the vertical axis is percentages, 0 to 100%, and the horizontal axis runs from quantitative to qualitative, how much it is involved. So there is going to be this curve where it's going to be 80-20 quantitative ability versus or IQ, I call it, versus the EQ, the people part in the beginning, right? It's really about those skills. And then somewhere the curve flips and it becomes 80-20 the other way. So it's those qualitative leadership, people skills, intangibles that are the 80%, and the technical is only 20%.
One of my mentors once said, the higher up you go in an organization, the more you're going to be judged on your people skills. There's a threshold level. You have to have the technical to get to that point. But once you get to that point, if you want to move up higher and higher up in the organization at the executive level, it's all about the people skills, and it's not having the answers, it's asking the right questions.
Absolutely. In fact, I've come to see that having the ability to ask really good questions is more important than having all the great answers, because that's really what shifts the direction of the entire organization, right? Asking the right question, it opens up so many vistas, whereas answering questions shuts things down because kind of puts a full stop at the end of the sentence.
You're right. The other big thing too is for many years, for decades, different generations just felt that development was not their job, that the company would develop them if they thought they were high potential, and that would be something that they would be tapped to do, identified as a high potential. But these days, I think it's critical for leaders to realize that you are responsible for your own development. No one else is going to do as good a job as you, and that needs to be a priority for you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think today it's even more important than ever because first, you're right. The world has changed, and the degree of loyalty that a company provides to the worker and vice versa, it's really come down a lot, hasn't it? To say the least. And as a result, what you really want to be doing is owning that development and making sure that you're developing yourself in a way that is portable so that you're not stuck in any one role. You don't get pigeonholed into one specific type of work, and that you really have the flexibility and agility to do all kinds of different things in your career because hey, we're all people born today are on average likely to live to be 100, and that means that no one's going to be retiring at age 60 or 65 anymore. You're going to be working a lot more of the time and needing to retool and retrain and so all of this development and investing in yourself is so important. And the other thing that's going on today is that people are so busy. Everyone is doing still more with less, right? There's a lot of demands on people in organizations. And it's all too easy if you don't have intentionality around it, if you're not deliberate and planful around it, it's all too easy to just be so busy with the urgent tasks, the day to day, that by the end of the year, you look up and say, oh gosh, I didn't have any moment to invest in myself.
You alluded to this before, but let's move into it now. This S curve representing your career potential. And within the curve, you think of a career through three primary stages: the aspiring, the driving, and arriving stage. So perhaps you could just unpack that a little bit for our listeners and let us know what each stage is about.
So in the very beginning, so the S curve, again, the vertical axis in this case is your degree of visible achievement, and the horizontal axis is time and effort. So in the beginning, the curve starts pretty low and it doesn't have a very big slope. Then it goes steep and then it flattens out again. So that's the S curve. It's like a learning curve. So in the very first stage, which I call the aspiring stage, that's where you're just starting out. I graduated from college. I decided I'm going to get a job in investment banking. I'm a financial analyst. I'm working really hard. And I am not visibly achieving that much because everything I do is new and I'm building a foundation. Then then I go back to business school and then I decide, you know what, I'm going to go back into investment banking and commit to having at least a chunk of my career there. And that's when I enter the driving phase. And this is when it's like all the ketchup comes out of the bottle, right? So it's really steep. And that's when I had to show that I was in capital markets. So I needed to show that I could run a part of a deal. Then had to show that I could run a whole deal, that I could cover a client, that I could be the main person on a client, that I could lead a small team, that I could lead a larger team. And it's also a time when all these promotions are there to go after. And that's the driving phase. And then you get to a point where at that phase, I was already a managing director. And then I was working really hard still, but not visibly achieving that much more. So my curve flattened out again. Because when you're very senior already, then you're working hard, but you've achieved so much. Incrementally, there's not that much more you can achieve visibly. So that is what I call the arriving phase, because you're arriving to where you aspired to be way back when.
Right, and you also mentioned that question mark, which I think is important to also clarify, because at some point during that arriving stage, you may be thinking to yourself, "What's next?"
Exactly. Exactly. So that question mark is really about what is next. And you get to that point with a question mark. You know you're there when you start to either feel a little bit bored, like you're not challenged anymore, or is this all there is? And you start to wonder. And that's where you've got some choices. One choice you can make is to retire, right? So if but most people who get to that stage may not be ready to retire yet. So you then have another second choice would be to carry on where you are and just kind of coast along, which in some businesses like the one I was in is asking to be fired in about 6 to 12 months. Or you could choose to get on a new S curve. And a new S curve could be in a totally different field, or it could be in the very seat you're in, but you decide, I'm going to re up and really figure out how I'm going to do what I do, but at the next level of impact and or anything in between. And the reason that this is so exciting, this question mark moment and this choice of getting on a new S curve, that's exciting because it really shows us that we can think of our whole career as one big S curve, but it's really made up of multiple mini S curves all along the way. So you can think of every role you take on as its own learning curve, its own S curve. So what's important is for whatever S curve you're on, is to figure out where are you right now on that S curve. And when you get on a new curve, you don't start all the way at the bottom again because, as my husband likes to say, you know stuff. Right, you've picked up a lot of wisdom and experience, and so much of whatever you've learned in one place, including if you decide to stay at home to be a carer or to take care of your children or other family, whatever it might be, you're still learning really, really useful skills there. So you don't begin all the way at the bottom. You begin just maybe a little bit below because you might need to learn new things or you might get to learn new things, let's frame it that way, and then you'll have a much quicker ramp up, after that.
Well, I love this visual and this analogy with the S curve. And I find that a lot of people just want to arrive at something, right? They don't want to go through the work of really the driving phase of getting really good at something. And the time that it's going to take is the time it takes. You can't speed it up in most cases because like Marshall Goldsmith says, you have to earn credibility twice. One, you have to be competent in that area that you want to excel at and drive forward. But also, people have to recognize you for that you are the expert.
This reminds me of this, model I like to think about, which is I call it the learn it, do it, show it model, which is really what you were talking about. First, you've gotta learn how to do it, then you gotta do it, which is practice doing it and getting good at it, and then you've gotta show it. So other people have to see that you are really good at this thing. Otherwise, if a tree falls in the forest, no one hears it. Did it really fall, right?
Well, so now, whatever the right mix is, you alluded to the 80-20 rule. The biggest step in getting results is being driven by those results that really matter. You, so what you state in the book is focus on the capabilities that matter most to you right now, which I think is a critical distinction versus just focusing on things that might be critical right now, but also in 5 years and 10 years. And you're trying to make sure that you're managing all those at the same time, which is difficult and makes you less focused.
Yes. And what I've come to realize is that you can really only work on one, maybe two big things at the same time. And especially when it's about personal and professional growth and development. Because change, you're talking about changing in growing is changing. And so it takes some real focus and attention to do it well. And In the book, I talk about three main areas to consider. And within each of those three main areas, I talk about three specific capabilities. And frankly, there are many, many more, but those are the ones that I think are the most important, the most salient. And the thing is, you can't work on nine different capabilities at the same time, as you say. Uh, and it's important to figure out, though, which one to work on next. And the one to work on next, there are different ways you can choose that, but it's really at the foundation is about which one is going to give you the most impact if you worked on it at this moment. And it could be something that is already a strength of yours that you want to lean into and develop at the next level. It could be an area that you feel like you need to develop a bit more in order to get to the minimum amount of that ability to be successful. Or it could just be the one that you are the most energized around. So, yeah, it is about making some choices, but the important thing is to choose one and invest in yourself.
Great. And those three areas are working with people, working on the business, and working on yourself. And like you said, there's three capabilities under each one. Why don't we start with working with people? Because in today's uncertain environment, which is volatile and fast moving, it means our ability to work with and relate to people is more important than ever for our overall success. Now, you list three capabilities. We don't have time to go into all three, but I did want to touch upon two of those three. And the first one is team leadership.
Yeah, so team leadership is one of those really interesting ones because first when I think about leading teams, I think about teams very loosely. So just because you don't have direct reports doesn't mean you're not leading a team of some sort. It could just be colleagues where you're leading not by authority but by influence, right? But let's say that you are leading a team. Looking back on my own career, I have come to realize that one of the most important things is just to keep out the worst in yourself. If I can just keep out my most dysfunctional behaviors, like being a perfectionist or like getting upset when somebody doesn't do things perfectly the first time, but it really was my fault because I didn't give them a good brief. So, any of those kinds of things, then everything else would work out really quite well. So, part of being a great team leader is just being able to not be a bad boss. And there's so many ways you could be a bad boss. I was a micromanager. I finally well, we have to ask my team whether I've grown out of that or not. But so let's save that for later, Charles.
All right. Well, and you list a lot of ones that types of bad bosses, the micromanager that delegates, but not really. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, you never know how they're going to react. The credit stealer, they take credit for great ideas.
That is a terrible one. Yes, terrible.
The public berater cuts you down in public and they want a quiet word later. That would suffice. The Sphinx that you never provides any feedback to teaches you anything. Because one of the big ahas here is right. Invest in your people. Let them know where they stand with you if you're going to be a great team leader. And investing in your people is so important if you want them to become great leaders themselves.
Absolutely. And one of the greatest leaders will have people leave their office feeling better than when they walked in. In fact, I was sitting having dinner with the CEO of Italy's largest energy company some years ago, and I asked him. His name was Paolo Scaroni, and I said, "Paolo, what do you think is the mark of a good leader?" And he said, I always want, and I try very hard to have whoever walks into my office leave my office better off than when they came in. And I don't always succeed, he said, but I try to do that even if I have to give them a very difficult message. And that has really stuck in my mind. for years because, as you said, it leading is really about how you show up with people and how you are able to bring out their best by being at your best to bring out their best, and it's just so easy to make excuses. There are lots of leaders out there, and I've been one of them, where you just get frustrated or you're under a lot of stress, and our stress personality oftentimes is the least effective in supporting our people to bring up their work at full potential, to operate at full potential.
Right. So letting them know where they stand with you, critically important. Invest in your people. And then what I think goes often unnoticed, you want to become a magnet for talent. You want to make your group attractive, gain the reputation for being someone great to work for in a group that's going places. You'll be amazed at the people that you attract to your team.
Yes, and that is one of the things that, I truly believe. If you can be a talent magnet, then so much of leading a team, forming a team, retaining a team, that it just takes care of itself. And so you really want to be the kind of leader that people want to work for. And we just talked about some of the traits and some of the behaviors that are helpful to having people really want to come and work for you. So part of it is how you treat people. Part of it is how you invest in people. But also a part of it is the extent to which you are doing really interesting and cool work. And part of it is how do you take work that doesn't sound like it's cool, but find the the framing for it that makes it really cool and high impact. And it's kind of like that story about President John F. Kennedy touring Cape Canaveral way back in the early days of trying to put a man on the moon, and he asked the janitor what he does, what his job is, and the man says, I am helping to put a man on the moon. So, that's the example of a reframe of, hey, I'm mopping floors, right? To I'm helping to put a man on the moon. So that is the kind of reframing that I'm talking about so that everybody can see themselves in the bigger impact and mission that the team or the unit or the organization is trying to make. And that's how you become a magnet for talent.
No, great story. I love that story as well. It's that unifying, compelling vision of an impossible dream, getting everyone to buy into it so that regardless of their role in the process, and really it was a unifying vision for the country during that time because everyone felt like they were helping achieve that goal. Sony had another unifying vision when they first started, and they were wanting to create a handheld transistor radio that really unified all the engineering departments and everyone else. They were an upstart no one knew, and that vision, once it was realized, really compelled them into much greater success. But you're right, having that compelling vision, getting everyone to buy into it, to have a vested interest in it is really key to becoming a great team leader.
Yes, yes. And one other thing that I would say is oftentimes when you're leading a team, I've seen some leaders not feel comfortable to keep promoting their people because they're thinking, "Oh gosh, they want to take my job. Where will I go?" But in reality, if people don't see that they can move up by joining your group, then they're not gonna wanna join your group. So, just because you promote somebody doesn't mean they have to stay in your group necessarily, right? You can help them get roles elsewhere, and then you'll have all these disciples or apostles or whatever we want to call them everywhere in the organization.
Well, that's a great reframe because a lot of people think that if I get the best and brightest, and they're going to quickly use me or this group as a stepping stone for greater things. And that's not a bad thing to have happen to you. I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights. If it has, I ask you to share it with someone who would also benefit from it. If you've been enjoying and gaining knowledge from this podcast, then subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast and additional learning resources. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and leave up to a 5-star review.